amid the ongoing resistance against judicial overhaul in Israel.
But we're also seeing this alignment of Russia, Iran, Turkey, and other countries forming this alliance against Israel.
Something extraordinary is unfolding in one of the world's most contested cities. From ancient prophecies to modern-day discoveries, events in Jerusalem are aligning in ways few expected. Could we be witnessing the signs of something far greater than politics or history? As tensions rise and the world's eyes turn once again to this sacred city, many are asking the same question. Is prophecy coming to life before our very eyes? What happens next might change everything. Jerusalem is one of the most talked about and analyzed cities in the world. It's a place where history, religion, and politics all meet. Over thousands of years, this city has seen the rise and fall of empires, the spread of belief systems, and the fulfillment of events that some believe were predicted long ago. It's no surprise that for many, Jerusalem holds a deep and continuing significance, not only for what has happened there, but for what could happen in the future. In recent years, there's been growing interest in the idea that Jerusalem may once again be at the center of something major. Some believe that current developments in and around the city reflect signs mentioned in ancient religious texts, particularly in the Bible. While interpretations vary, there is no doubt that the events taking place in this part of the world are attracting global attention. These include political decisions, religious developments, and even natural events that are being closely watched by scientists and spiritual leaders alike. What stands out is the pace at which changes are occurring. People who have studied biblical prophecy say that Jerusalem is central to a number of predictions about the so-called end times, a period believed to involve global transformation, spiritual awakening, and significant upheaval. Whether or not one believes these ideas, it is clear that Jerusalem remains one of the most contested and symbolically powerful cities on the planet. Many Christian and Jewish traditions consider Jerusalem to be the location where major prophetic events will take place. One of the most discussed prophecies involves the return of Jesus, also known in Hebrew tradition as the Messiah. According to the Bible, especially books like Zechariah, Matthew, and Revelation, this return will be marked by specific signs, many of which are said to begin in or around Jerusalem. One prophecy in particular has sparked interest among both religious and non-religious observers. Zechariah 14:4 describes a moment in the future when his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west. This event is considered by some to be a literal occurrence, while others interpret it symbolically. However, recent geological research has brought new attention to the area. Scientists have found a fault line running directly under the Mount of Olives. This discovery has led to questions about whether the prophecy could be linked to a natural earthquake or some other seismic activity that might take place there. While science does not claim to confirm religious prophecy, the presence of this fault line is a fact. It has been studied by geologists over the years, and the region is known to be seismically active. Earthquakes have struck the area in the past, and experts say they could happen again. This scientific finding has added a new dimension to the debate, with some suggesting that prophecy and geology could, in some way, intersect. Another reason people are paying close attention to Jerusalem is the sense of urgency being expressed by religious leaders. Some believe that we are living in a time where prophetic signs are becoming more visible. They point to various world events, social unrest, political instability, environmental disasters, and see them as connected. While skeptics argue that these types of events have always occurred throughout history, believers say the current alignment of these events with specific biblical passages is different. They argue that there's a convergence happening now that hasn't been seen before. The city of Jerusalem itself has also undergone significant changes in recent years. More visitors are coming not just for tourism, but for religious reasons. There's a growing sense among some communities that Jerusalem is preparing for something larger, something with global impact. It's not unusual to see religious groups holding gatherings, prayers, or discussions about what they see as the unfolding of prophecy. This sense of anticipation isn't shared by everyone, but it is noticeable. At the same time, political developments in Jerusalem have made global headlines. Issues around sovereignty, religious access to certain holy sites, and international recognition of the city's status have stirred tensions. These tensions often involve multiple countries and can quickly escalate. For example, when certain governments have chosen to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the reaction has been intense, both in the region and around the world. These moves are not just political. For many, they touch on deeply held spiritual beliefs. Adding to this atmosphere is a series of discoveries in the city and its surroundings. Archaeological digs have uncovered ancient artifacts that continue to fuel the discussion about the city's past and future. Some discoveries appear to line up with biblical accounts, which leads some to believe that history is validating religious texts. Others view these findings as important for historical knowledge, without necessarily drawing spiritual conclusions. One example involves preparations for religious ceremonies that haven't taken place in thousands of years. Certain groups in Israel have begun recreating items and garments described in the Bible, such as the high priest's garments or sacred vessels. These efforts are part of a wider initiative by religious organizations who believe these items may be needed again soon. Whether or not they will be used in the near future, their existence adds to the growing belief among some that a significant religious event could be on the horizon. Despite differing opinions on what all these developments mean, there is a shared sense that something important is happening. For some, it is a time of spiritual awakening. For others, it is a moment to watch global trends more closely. Still others remain cautious or dismissive, pointing to the long history of failed predictions and the risk of overinterpretation. What makes the current situation stand out, however, is not just the number of signs people are pointing to, but how quickly they seem to be appearing. This speed, combined with the global interconnectedness we now have through media and the internet, means that developments in Jerusalem are being seen and discussed in real time by millions around the world. Jerusalem has always been a place where the sacred and the political are closely linked. Today, those lines are once again being blurred, and people are taking notice. Whether viewed through the lens of religion, politics, science, or history, the city is clearly playing a central role in a much larger conversation about the future. As it stands, we are left with questions more than answers. Is something truly shifting in Jerusalem, or are current events simply part of the city's ongoing story? Are the prophecies people refer to meant to be taken literally, or are they symbolic representations of human history and struggle? And most importantly, what role will Jerusalem play in the years to come? The first of these is the rebirth of Israel as a nation. For nearly 2,000 years, the idea of the Jewish people returning to their ancestral homeland seemed unlikely. The dispersion, or diaspora, saw Jewish communities scattered across the world. Yet, in 1948, following the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust, the State of Israel was officially established. This moment is widely referenced in discussions about prophecy, because it is seen by many believers as the fulfillment of Isaiah 66:8, which asks, "Can a nation be born in a day?" On May 14, 1948, Israel was declared a sovereign state, and many point to this moment as a modern fulfillment of that verse. This wasn't just a political event. For many, it had deep spiritual meaning. The idea that an ancient people could return to their homeland after so long was seen as extraordinary, and it revived conversations about the timeline of biblical prophecy. Some also note that this rebirth happened at a time when global attention was shifting. It was the early days of the Cold War, the United Nations was newly established, and media was becoming more widespread. The rebirth of Israel didn't happen in isolation. It happened in full view of the world. There are also those who point to unusual astronomical events that occurred around the same time, viewing them as signs that something larger was at work. While the scientific community typically interprets such events as natural occurrences, believers often see deeper meaning in the timing of these signs. The key idea is that Israel's sudden reappearance on the world stage wasn't just historical, it was prophetic. The second major sign involves the return, or gathering, of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Since 1948, there has been a continuous wave of migration back to Israel from countries all over the world. This return is seen by some as a direct reference to passages like Deuteronomy 33 and Ezekiel 37, which speak of God gathering his people from the nations where they were scattered. According to Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics, millions of Jews have made Aliyah, the act of immigrating to Israel, since the state was founded. This trend continues today, even in the face of regional tensions and ongoing conflict. Some Jewish families are leaving stable, prosperous countries to resettle in Israel, driven by a mix of spiritual belief, cultural identity, and sometimes personal safety. The reasons are varied, but the result is a growing and increasingly diverse population returning to what many consider their ancestral homeland. What makes this return remarkable to observers of prophecy is the scale and speed at which it's happening. The Bible's references to dry bones coming back to life, as in Ezekiel's vision, are often interpreted as symbolic of the nation of Israel coming together once again. In that vision, the bones not only come together, but they are given breath and life. This is understood by many as representing the Jewish people's return, not just physically, but spiritually and nationally. The third sign relates to the rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, commonly referred to as the Third Temple. Historically, the first temple was built by King Solomon and later destroyed by the Babylonians. The second temple was rebuilt and later destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. Since then, the site, known today as the Temple Mount, has been one of the most disputed religious areas in the world. For many Jews and Christians, the rebuilding of the temple is a key step in the fulfillment of prophecy. The Bible mentions this in several books, including Daniel, Revelation, and Thessalonians. In these texts, the temple is described as playing a central role in end-time events. However, the political and religious complexity surrounding the Temple Mount has made the idea of reconstruction highly sensitive. Despite this, preparations for a potential third temple are already underway. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has spent decades recreating the items described in the Bible, including the menorah, priestly garments, and other sacred vessels. These items have been designed according to detailed scriptural specifications and are kept in readiness for the day they may be used. The belief among some is that once the right political conditions are met, construction could begin rapidly. Adding to this is growing interest from different corners of the religious world. Some evangelical Christian groups are also closely watching developments, believing that the rebuilding of the temple will trigger a series of prophetic events, including the return of Jesus. One verse often quoted in this context is 2 Thessalonians 2:4, which describes a figure who will take his seat in the temple, declaring himself to be God, a key moment in what is referred to as the tribulation period. The fourth and final sign that is often mentioned involves the red heifer, an animal described in Numbers 19:2 as being essential for temple purification. According to biblical instruction, before any new temple rituals can begin, a red heifer, without blemish or defect, must be sacrificed, and its ashes used in purification rites. For centuries, such an animal was not found, or at least not one that met all the required conditions. However, in 2022, 5 red heifers were reportedly brought to Israel from the United States. These animals are now being closely watched by religious authorities. They must remain unblemished until they reach the appropriate age to be used for the purification process. What has captured the attention of both religious communities and the media is the possibility that for the first time in over 2,000 years, the requirements for temple purification could soon be met. There have also been reports of unusual occurrences linked to the arrival of the red heifers, with some priests describing moments of fear or awe. While these accounts are anecdotal, they add to the atmosphere of expectancy. For those who follow these prophecies, the appearance of the red heifers is more than just an agricultural story. It's a potential turning point. Together, these 4 signs, the rebirth of Israel, the return of the Jewish people, the preparation for the Third Temple, and the arrival of the red heifer, form what many consider to be a framework for understanding where we might be in the prophetic timeline. Of course, not everyone interprets these events in the same way. Some view them as symbolic, others as literal. Many religious scholars caution against making specific predictions, emphasizing that prophecy is often fulfilled in unexpected ways. Still, the facts on the ground are difficult to ignore. Israel exists as a nation once again. The population continues to grow, fueled by migration from around the globe. Items needed for a future temple have already been created, and for the first time in recent memory, red heifers that may meet biblical criteria are now in the country. Whether one sees these as coincidences, natural outcomes of history, or signs of something deeper, depends largely on personal belief. What is clear, however, is that the conversation is no longer confined to religious circles. Academics, scientists, political analysts, and people of many faiths, or no faith at all, are increasingly aware of the connections being drawn between modern events and ancient texts. The question is not only whether prophecy is being fulfilled, but what it means for the world if it is. For those who study biblical prophecy, Jerusalem is not just a focal point of the past. It is seen as the center stage for future global events. According to several passages in the Bible, there will come a time when all nations will gather against Jerusalem. This idea appears in the book of Zechariah, which says, "On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations." Interpretations of this verse vary, but some believe it refers to a coming period of international conflict centered on Jerusalem, in which the city becomes a point of global contention. What makes this idea more relevant today is the political reality that has been unfolding. In recent decades, several attempts have been made to broker peace in the region, often involving discussions about how Jerusalem should be governed. One of the most talked about proposals is the two-state solution, which suggests that Israel and a future Palestinian state would share the land, with some even suggesting that Jerusalem itself be divided or placed under international control. While this is viewed by some as a practical step toward peace, others see it as a direct challenge to biblical prophecy. According to certain religious interpretations, any attempt to divide Jerusalem is not only politically risky, but spiritually dangerous. In Joel 3:2, for example, there is a warning that God will judge the nations for dividing his land. Supporters of this view argue that dividing Jerusalem goes against divine will, and that such actions could lead to serious consequences, both politically and spiritually. From this perspective, the rising international pressure to reshape Jerusalem's status is seen not just as a geopolitical issue, but as a fulfillment of prophecy. In recent years, the global stance toward Israel and Jerusalem has begun to shift. While some countries have strengthened their ties with Israel, others have moved in the opposite direction. There is growing criticism of Israeli policies in various parts of the world, and international bodies like the United Nations have passed numerous resolutions regarding Israeli actions and the status of Jerusalem. These resolutions are often seen by supporters of Israel as unfair or biased, and they add fuel to the belief that the world is gradually turning against Jerusalem, just as the prophecies suggest. One of the most sensitive and contested locations in the entire city is the Temple Mount. This site holds significance for both Jews and Muslims. It is the location of the first and second temples in Jewish tradition, and is also home to the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, two of the most sacred sites in Islam. Because of this, access to the area is heavily restricted, and any attempts to change the status quo are met with immediate and often intense reactions. The Temple Mount is not only a spiritual site, it is a symbol of national identity and religious authority. Any perceived threat to this site can quickly escalate into widespread tension. Several incidents over the past few years have shown how fragile the situation is. Changes in security measures, political visits, or construction plans have all led to protests, diplomatic fallouts, and sometimes violence. For those who see the Temple Mount as central to future prophecy, the tension surrounding it is another sign that we may be approaching a period of major upheaval. Some believe that this growing instability is setting the stage for a broader conflict. Zechariah 14:2 refers to a time when nations will gather against Jerusalem to fight. The city will be captured and its people displaced. This is seen by many as a description of a future war centered on Jerusalem, possibly marking the beginning of what is often called the final conflict, or Armageddon. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the increasing focus on Jerusalem in international diplomacy is seen by some as aligning with this idea. At the same time, religious leaders and political figures continue to debate what should be done about Jerusalem's future. Behind closed doors, discussions about sovereignty, control, and religious access continue to shape the city's political landscape. Some of these conversations involve powerful international players, including global superpowers, religious organizations, and influential non-state actors. What unites these varied groups is a shared understanding that what happens in Jerusalem has the potential to affect global peace, security, and stability. For many observers, what's striking is how quickly the conversation about Jerusalem has moved from a regional concern to a global issue. Increasingly, decisions about the city are not being made just in the Middle East, but in places like Washington, Brussels, Moscow, and the United Nations. Statements made by world leaders, votes in international assemblies, and even public protests all demonstrate that Jerusalem's fate is now a matter of global importance. Whether or not one believes in prophecy, the level of international involvement is undeniable. Some see this global involvement as dangerous. They argue that turning Jerusalem into a shared or divided city risks further instability. Others argue the opposite, that unless the city's future is addressed through international cooperation, the risk of conflict will only increase. These differing views reflect the deep divide between political realism and religious conviction. Among Jewish communities in Israel and abroad, there is a strong belief that Jerusalem is the eternal, undivided capital of the Jewish people. This belief is rooted in history, scripture, and cultural identity. Many see international pressure to divide the city as a direct challenge to that belief. Meanwhile, many Palestinians view East Jerusalem as the future capital of their hoped-for state. This deep disagreement over a single city is one of the core reasons why a long-lasting peace has remained so difficult to achieve. The religious dimension adds another layer to the already complex situation. Some Christian groups see Jerusalem not only as a historical site, but as the key location where end-time events will unfold. In this context, political decisions are not just matters of diplomacy, they're part of a much bigger, spiritually charged narrative. As a result, decisions about Jerusalem are watched closely, and even small changes can be interpreted as signs that larger events are on the way. What makes all of this even more complex is that the narrative surrounding Jerusalem is not just found in religious texts. It is also deeply embedded in international law, national identities, and historical memory. The city has been conquered, rebuilt, and fought over more times than almost any other in history. Each layer of its story adds to the weight of present-day decisions. As it stands, there is no clear path forward. Proposals come and go, negotiations start and stall, and the situation on the ground remains tense. But the direction of movement is clear. Jerusalem is becoming more central to global affairs. What was once a local issue is now a key part of international policy discussions. This reality, for many who study prophecy, is significant. It echoes ancient texts that speak of the world turning its attention to Jerusalem in the final days. Whether one views these developments as purely political or through the lens of prophecy, the facts remain. Jerusalem is at the heart of international debate. It is being spoken about in boardrooms, parliaments, religious gatherings, and newsrooms. What happens in this city in the coming years may not only shape the Middle East, but could potentially reshape the global order. For centuries, people have looked to the future with a mix of hope and concern. In particular, many religious traditions include the belief that the world as we know it will one day come to an end, not in a random or chaotic way, but through a series of events that have already been outlined in sacred texts. In Christianity, this belief is closely tied to the return of Jesus Christ. While interpretations vary across denominations and individuals, one thing is clear: a significant portion of biblical prophecy is focused on what believers call the end times. Among the most widely cited prophecies is one found in the book of Zechariah, which describes a moment when the Mount of Olives, located just east of Jerusalem, will split in two as Jesus returns. This specific location is not only important in Christian teachings, but also holds deep significance in Judaism. The fact that a fault line exists beneath the Mount of Olives has led some to wonder whether a natural earthquake could one day cause such a split. While geologists point out that the area is indeed seismically active, any connection between a future earthquake and biblical prophecy remains speculative. Still, it is an example of how science and scripture occasionally intersect in the minds of those trying to make sense of current events. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus gives a detailed response to his disciples when they ask what signs will signal his return. He warns of wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, famines, earthquakes, and widespread persecution. He also speaks of an increase in deception, lawlessness, and a decline in love and morality. These signs, according to the account, are not the end themselves, but are described as the beginning of birth pains, a phrase that suggests both pain and an eventual new beginning. One key takeaway from Jesus' teaching is that while the signs may be clear, the exact timing is not. In Matthew 24:36, he says, "No one knows the day or the hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." This message is repeated throughout the New Testament. The return of Christ will happen, but the moment is unknown and will come suddenly. This idea has led many Christians to focus less on predicting exact dates and more on staying spiritually prepared. A commonly asked question today is whether we are already living in the end times. Some point to global events, natural disasters, economic uncertainty, political unrest, and rapid technological change as evidence that the signs are unfolding. Others argue that such events have always occurred throughout history, and that interpreting them as signs can lead to unnecessary fear or distraction. Still, for many believers, the difference now is the number of signs happening at once and the speed at which they are unfolding. According to biblical scholars, the Bible contains around 735 prophecies, spread across both the Old and New Testaments. Of those, it is said that over 80% have already been fulfilled, with remarkable accuracy. That leaves a smaller portion, about 20%, that are yet to be realized, most of which relate directly to the return of Jesus and the events that follow. These include the final global conflict, the judgment of nations, the establishment of a new heaven and earth, and the reign of Christ. The idea that prophecy has been fulfilled with such precision is used by many to support their belief in the accuracy and reliability of the Bible. Events such as the fall of ancient empires, the rebirth of Israel as a nation, and the spread of the Christian message throughout the world are often cited as examples of prophecy coming true. Based on this track record, believers argue that the remaining prophecies are just as likely to be fulfilled in due time. Importantly, the purpose of prophecy in the Bible is not simply to satisfy human curiosity or to provide a timeline of future events. Rather, it is presented as a way for people to be spiritually awake and prepared. In the book of Revelation, as well as in Jesus' own words, there is a consistent message: stay alert, watch for the signs, and live in a way that reflects readiness. The emphasis is not on knowing the exact moment, but on being found faithful whenever that moment arrives. Some of the clearest signs Jesus describes include the global spread of the gospel, increasing conflict and persecution, natural disasters, and the appearance of false messiahs and false prophets. He also warns that many will fall away from faith and that lawlessness will increase. These descriptions lead many to feel that modern society reflects these conditions more than ever before. Whether it's through social division, declining trust in institutions, or the rise of misinformation, many feel that the warnings given 2,000 years ago are becoming more relevant by the day. Despite these challenges, the message is not one of fear, but of hope. The return of Jesus is described as a moment of restoration, justice, and peace. For believers, it means the end of suffering and the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one where God's presence is fully realized and the brokenness of the world is finally healed. It's a vision that inspires many to continue in their faith and to live with a sense of purpose. Another aspect of the discussion around the return of Jesus is the role of personal and collective responsibility. While prophecy outlines certain events, there is still an ongoing call for action, caring for others, seeking justice, and spreading the message of hope. This balance between watching for signs and staying engaged in the world is a central theme in many sermons and teachings. The idea is that preparation is not about hiding from the world, but about living meaningfully within it. For some, the rapid advancement of technology is also part of the discussion. Global communication, artificial intelligence, and digital tracking have raised new ethical and spiritual questions. Some believe these developments could play a role in the fulfillment of prophecy, while others see them as tools that can be used for good or for harm, depending on human choices. What's clear is that technology is changing how people understand the world and how they think about the future. In the end, the return of Jesus, as described in the Bible, is a moment that brings together many threads: faith, history, morality, and human destiny. Whether one believes in a literal fulfillment of these events or sees them as metaphorical, the impact of these teachings remains significant. They shape the worldview of millions of people and continue to influence decisions in both personal and public life. While the exact details remain a matter of belief and interpretation, the core message is consistent. The world is moving toward a climactic moment, and individuals are called to be spiritually awake, morally grounded, and aware of the times in which they live. This perspective doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it provides a framework for how to face it, with faith, hope, and a sense of purpose. The return of Jesus is not presented in Scripture as an ending, but as a beginning. According to Christian belief, it marks the start of a new era, one of peace, justice, and divine presence. Whether that moment comes soon or far in the future, the invitation remains the same: to live in awareness, to seek truth, and to be ready for whatever lies ahead. As people continue to interpret events around them, some will see the fulfillment of prophecy. Others will see the unfolding of history. What they have in common is a desire to understand where we are headed and what it all means. For many, the answer is found not just in looking at the world, but in looking at the words that have guided faith for centuries. The idea that 81% of biblical prophecies have already been fulfilled gives them confidence. The remaining 19% keeps them watching. Whether the signs are seen as symbolic or literal, subtle or obvious, there is a growing awareness that something significant may be taking place. In that sense, the Bible continues to do what it has always done: offer insight, raise questions, and point to something greater than the present moment.